Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
G'day, it's Dr. Justin Coulson. Welcome to another episode of the Happy Families podcast. Today, a guest who has written an article, done some research, and this thing has gone bonkers. Global media around a piece of research looking at the influence of the Insta mums. The article by Eloise Jermick, who is a PhD student at the University of Illinois in Chicago, is titled "The Impact of Instagram Mummy Blogger Content on the Perceived Self-Efficacy of Mothers." And Eloise, who researches new media, social media, and the impact on us and the world, joins me now. Really nice to be able to spend some time with you all the way from Chicago. Thanks for being on the podcast, Eloise.
My pleasure.
Let's just sort of break down what this study was about. I want to do this because we're all on Instagram, and the way we interact with it affects the way we feel about ourselves and the world. So this study, the impact of Instagram mummy blogger content on perceived self-efficacy of mums. Can we just, we know what Instagram mummy blogger content is loosely enough, but what do you mean by perceived self-efficacy of mums?
So as you said, we all sort of exist today online in a variety of different ways. When I first started this project, I really wanted to just look at how the content we view online impacts how we feel about ourselves. So it started as sort of like a look into self-esteem, but I really wanted to narrow it down and look specifically at motherhood and see how content posted online by motherhood bloggers impacts how regular everyday parents feel about the work that they're doing. Because obviously we already know that social media has a massive impact on like things like body image and stuff like that. So that was really where I started is wanting to understand how parenting based content, specifically on Instagram, because I felt that Instagram is the most sort of platform that tends to gloss over things the most and make everything seem sort of picture perfect.
It's the most superficial, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have a bad day on Instagram. You can have a bad day on Snapchat, but you don't have a bad day on Instagram.
Exactly. The nature of Instagram is one that encourages content creators to really put forward that picture perfect face. So yeah, I wanted to look at how that iterated itself in parenting content and then how that influenced parents at the end of the day.
Okay, so Eloise, you call the Insta mummy bloggers alpha mums, right? So alpha mums meaning...
I broke it down into either the alpha mom or the more realistic mom. And the alpha mom is something that we think of. It's probably the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of mommy blogger. It's a mother, a parent who, again, always puts that best face forward, always seems to be excelling in their parenthood as well as in their career. They never really show that side of the struggle of motherhood, the grittier stuff. The pictures are always edited, they're matching with their little kids, and everybody's one big happy family. The other side that I looked at was the more realistic side of mommy blogging and of parenthood, and that was one that was, grittier, less edited photos and really sharing struggles with parenthood, be that postpartum depression, be that just exhaustion, anything that might come along with being a parent. So what I did was just showed content to my participants, either from the alpha mom subset or from the more realistic subset, and then had participants respond to a set of questions based on gauging how they felt about how they were doing as a parent. So some questions like, oh, I feel like I'm able to adequately provide for my child, or I feel like I was made to be a parent, or something like that. And interestingly enough, there wasn't a marked difference in between the two set of respondents. So the perceived self-efficacy wasn't any different for people who saw the alpha mom content as people who saw the realistic content.
When I hear about research like this, it reminds me of the paradigm that's used in a lot of body image research. So for decades now, usually women have been asked to have a look at images in a magazine or online and then rate how they feel about their own body based on what they've seen. And usually when you're seeing imagery that's in a magazine or online of other women, it ends up making the viewer feel less secure, less satisfied within themselves, and probably have less self-efficacy, less of a belief that they can actually ever look the way that they have always dreamed of looking. Would it be a reasonable assumption that mums who looked at the images that you showed them experienced the same thing that the Instagram mummy bloggers, whether they're being alpha mums or being totally realistic and saying, hey, I get it, life's hard and my life's a hot mess. Would it be fair to say that mums that were viewing this content still experienced a reduction in self-efficacy?
That was my initial assumption going in, is that looking at specifically the alpha mom content would make parents feel worse about how they were doing as parents or about their quote unquote parenting skill. But that wasn't the case. I expected that. That was my hypothesis, but I think that maybe it wasn't really the case because it could be something as small as, like sample size or things that happen in social scientific research. But I'm hopeful that, maybe it says something about the way we're talking about motherhood in the media and just like as a larger society, that we're becoming more accepting of different types of motherhood, different types of bodies. And I think that goes along with sort of the larger feminist movement and sort of body positivity movement, in that perhaps we're becoming more accepting of our own, not flaws, but maybe shortcomings is the right word.
Yeah, I love this. So the hypothesis was, quote, not supported, close quote. After the break, we're going to find out what you did discover in this study, because it does impact on every mum, every parent who's spending their time on social media trying to find parenting content. It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. Eloise Jermick is a PhD student at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She researches in new media, social media, and the impact that it has on us and the world. We're having a conversation about an article that was published in the journal Social Media and Society, and we've just discovered that the hypothesis was not supported. Looking at alpha mums and looking at realistic mums on Instagram doesn't necessarily make you feel worse about how effective you can be as a mum. So, Eloise, now that all of the previous assumptions have been blown out of the water, what did you actually discover? Why is this relevant for every parent who's listening right now?
Yeah. So in addition to showing the content to my participants, I also asked them a set of questions just about parenthood in general, where they get their parenting information. And obviously one of the main sources of parenting information that people found was online. And ultimately what my research showed was that people who cited online resources as their main source of parenting information had lower levels of perceived self-efficacy in regards to their parenthood. That was an unexpected, interesting thing that I found.
So what we're really saying here is stop listening to people like Dr. Justin Coulson. Don't look for my stuff online. You're really just trying to put me out of business, aren't you? You're saying don't look for this.
I wouldn't quite go that
far. but there's something really curious about this to me, and I'd love to discuss the implications of it with you. If a parent is jumping online to find all of the information that they need to parent better, why do you think their self-efficacy is lower? Is it because they've got perhaps fewer supports that they can rely on, or maybe they've got a lot of support in their environment, but they just don't want that kind of support? Like they've got parents who are saying, you got to parent harder, you've got to discipline those kids more, you've got to whack them, and they're saying, no, that's not what I want to do. But because they're struggling with the kids, they're out of desperation searching for people like me online. I mean, where do you go with that? What does it really mean in a practical way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the findings sort of speak to the larger media inundated society that we exist in. And it speaks to the importance of media literacy. So, it happens all the time. All of a sudden, for example, you have a tickle in your throat and you go on WebMD and you decide that you have throat cancer. I think that sort of jump in logic is one that is maybe seen in the online parenthood space. So I think that when searching for information online, any type of information, but especially parenting information, it's important to do the simple things that we do in other types of research. Check who's writing this article. Is it coming from, a verified source, somebody with a degree in a relevant field, which is exactly what you're doing here.
Okay, you can keep talking. That's fine then. All right, I'm feeling a little less pressure now. Okay.
But, just things like that, checking dates of when things were posted and making sure that the sources you're choosing to engage with are ones that are viable and reflect your values. Because when you go on the internet, at the end of the day, you can really find anything. So understanding what is valuable is really important when we're interacting with any type of information online.
I really appreciate the way that you framed that as well, because just as you were saying that, you highlighted the importance of checking the date. How old's the material? I shudder when I see some of the things that I wrote, even half a dozen years ago, about the online world. Based on the research that we had then, I was saying the very best that we knew in terms of the guidance that I was offering to parents, but the research in that area has shifted markedly in the last half dozen years. In fact, even in the last 24 months, particularly with COVID. And the advice that we give now about screens and social media and the way that we interact on those platforms has really shifted. There are still some fundamentals that remain, but I would not say today what I said a handful of years ago. So just hearing you say that, making sure that it's current, making sure that it's credible, good advice for how we should move forward in I think you said a media inundated world.
Yeah.
Are there any other insights that you've had as you've researched the mummy blogger world? Was there anything that you just think parents need to be careful of, be advised against, or seek out so that they can do better for their families?
Yeah. I think it really, at the end of the day, sort of harkens back to that media literacy that I was talking about. Not only in terms of doing research online, checking your sources, checking the dates, all of that, but when you're engaging with social media, do all those things that likely, as a parent, you're telling your kids to do when they're on social media. Remember that at the end of the day, for most people, social media is just a highlight reel. Looking at what other parents are doing, what other parents look like, how they interact with their children, that might be entirely different than what's actually going on. And really just using those sort of grounding questions of I guess it's not really a question, but A, I know that what I'm seeing right now is a highlight reel. B, I know that I'm a different person and I'm in a different family than every single other person on social media. And really just remembering that as you look forward and continue to interact with your social media, because it's ridiculous to assume that we're not going to interact with social media. But just keeping those two points in mind, and then maybe putting your phone down when you start to see yourself slipping into that nature of comparison. I think that's a really good way to stay grounded and still sort of engage with online parenting blogs, social media pages, whatever.
Basic but essential reminders. Eloise Jermick, PhD student at University of Illinois, Chicago. We will link to that study in our show notes for people who want to see more. Thanks so much for joining me on the Happy Families podcast.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And for more information, you can check the show notes or visit happyfamilies.com.au and make your family happier.